Predict, pick, and prevail in your fantasy football leagues with Nick Giacobbe and Nick Cap. From breakouts to busts, superstars to sleepers, these are the guys that will help you achieve fantasy glory. This is the PrimeTime Fantasy Podcast.
Welcome everybody to Season 4, Episode 13 of the PrimeTime Fantasy Football Podcast, where we give you our predictions, our picks, with the hopes that we help you prevail throughout Week 2 and the rest of the 2024 fantasy football season. I'm your host, Nick Giacobbe. Joining me is Nick Cap, who, if you're not watching on YouTube, which you should be, he is draped in his gangrene hat. He's in his hat. Do you have a hoodie on too? Is that just a green
No,
hoodie?
No, just a green shirt. I got the jersey. I'll throw the jersey on when the game starts.
What jersey do you possibly have?
I have a Rodgers. I have a Rodgers and a Sauce jersey. They were gifts for Christmas. So we gotta rep them while Rodgers is healthy. So I'm gonna use Rodgers for Week 1. Bring back his San Fran blood, and hopefully we get the win. You guys will see if this smile is still here on Thursday based on that game. If this hat is switched out, of course we're gonna rep the hat no matter what. We trust in our team. But big week of football, Nick. Very exciting, up and down.
Big week of football. I'm wearing black for no reason in particular, but I will be also rooting for those Jets. I'm a big Jet fan tonight because I love rooting against those 49ers. But you're right, a big week of football. Some injuries, some big-time playmakers, some duds, a lot to get into. So if you rock with us for the past few years, you know that we always give you a fun show right after the week kind of ends to kind of recap the week a little bit and to prepare you with a waiver wire for next week. There's some injuries that are popping up even within the last 10 minutes. So we're recording Monday night. It's about 5 o'clock Eastern time. The news just broke about Puka Nacua officially. Well, not officially, but it looks like he'll be heading to the IR. So we did just get that news. Could edit our waiver wire list a little bit. Your waiver wires have to be set by Wednesday at, I guess, 3 a.m. I guess is the latest you have to set your waiver wire. So that is why we do a waiver wire show that drops on a Tuesday with a little bit of a weekly recap to kind of close the book on that week. But also our points coming out of that week will be to propel the next week ahead and to let you know what to look for in Week 2 and the rest of the season. If this is your first time listening or watching us, maybe you watched our live show on Sunday, wanted to tune into a weekly show, thank you so much. You're going to get 2 episodes from us most weeks. We do live lives and have conflicts, but most weeks you'll get a show on Tuesday and then on Thursday/Friday, depending on injury news, to get you through the week. And then a live show Sundays, 8:30 a.m. Eastern time on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. I hope you guys listen to me on Jaden Daniels. Can't wait to talk about that. But that was a note I gave you on the Sunday morning live show. So make sure you're joining us for those live shows for sure. All right, let's not waste any time, Nick. Let's get into the waiver wire here. This is our first segment, most important segment, I think, for a Tuesday morning. So not a crazy waiver wire, Nick. I know last year, I think we had both Kyren Williams and Puka Nacua after Week 1. I don't think there's a real surefire guy. I think there's options, but not a surefire guy. But some injuries that kind of are affecting the waiver wire, and that's why you need to go to it. So we go position by position like we normally do. Let's start with quarterback here. Baker Mayfield is owned in 34% of leagues. I think he might have been the quarterback one or two on the week. He was pretty high up there. Geno Smith owned in 15% of leagues, and Justin Fields owned in 11% of leagues. It's the guy that Nick was banging the drum for on our Sunday morning live show. So, Nick, who do you like? I mean, if you're picking up a quarterback, you probably lost Jordan Love. He'll probably be out, the next 4 weeks. I don't think you'll be picking up any of these other guys to start, probably. I mean, maybe you don't trust the guy that you drafted, but who do you like for these next 4-ish weeks, I'd say, or maybe rest of the season, however you want to do it?
So based off what we saw in Week 1, let's start by saying this. This Week 1 was one of the worst in NFL history.
It was terrible. It might have been the lowest scoring one ever.
There was only 31 touchdowns scored this week so far, and we still have Monday to go. That's ridiculously low. Just for some perspective, 4 years ago, there was over 60 touchdown scores in Week 1. So the kind of what I'm seeing and what I'm hearing from some analysts is that defensive preparation has gotten a lot better, and the offensive penalties have just been adding up, and it's been delaying.
Oh, there were so many flags this week. It was atrocious. It was just flag. If I wasn't watching the Red Zone, the 3 games that I watched that weren't on Red Zone were the Thursday night, Friday night, and Sunday night, it felt like flag after flag after flag.
100%. So what I will say is if you're panicking about your team and you feel like you need to win the waiver wire, don't. And I'll say that for this. There is no league winner that I see on the waiver wire this week. There's no one that's going to differentiate you like a Kyron or like a Puka Nacua from last year, where you're going to pick them up week 1, you're going to fab dump them, and you are, elevated to the next level of team. That's not the case. Do not panic on your superstars. My thought process going into this waiver wire week, don't spend up on most of these guys unless you absolutely need it. Otherwise, I'm good. I'll wait to see if someone panic drops one of those other rookies or a stud that you really liked, a later sleeper that did not perform to expectation.
I also want to note here that as Nick is stating, I want to back him up there. Week 1's a weird week. I remember a couple of years ago, Aaron Rodgers and the Packers got blasted by the Saints. It was like 31-0. Packers went on to have a great year and make the NFC Championship and lose because that's what Rodgers does. It's not a knock on Nick's Jets, but I'm not a Rodgers guy. I think it was last year, maybe it was the year before, the San Francisco 49ers got whacked by the Bears week 1, and the Bears finished with maybe 3 wins. Point being, week 1 exists in its own universe.
Yes.
And when me and Nick get into our points about the week later, that's one point that not one of my points, but that's a reasoning. So, Nick, before you talk about these quarterbacks, I do want to give you the schedules here. Baker Mayfield will be going up against the Lions, hosting the Broncos, hosting the Eagles, at the Falcons, and then at the Saints. So those are his 5 weeks. And again, the only reason why you're probably picking up a quarterback is if you're in a deeper league or if you have Jordan Love. For the Seahawks, for Geno and the Seahawks, Geno is going at Patriots, hosting the Dolphins, at the Lions, hosting the Giants, hosting the Niners. And lastly, Justin Fields, if he does remain the starter, at the Broncos, hosting the Chargers, at the Colts, hosting the Cowboys, and at the Raiders. I see 3 pretty favorable schedules, maybe one or 2 games on each guy that you're going to have to struggle with. But how would you rank these guys? Who would you want to attack?
So Baker Mayfield's the one. To me, that offense looked really, really good considering they lost their offensive coordinator. I think Bucky Irving, he's not a fantasy stud at this point, but like Nick mentioned, he looked really good. Nick liked the reports coming out of training camp, thought he would look really good. He looked good when he was out on the field. And their wide receiver 3, they kept rotating whoever that was out on the field.
McMillan looked good. McMillan looked good as the rookie.
And Godwin played a lot better in this game than he did pretty much at any point last season or any stretch of game. So to me, Baker's that guy. And for matchup, he's going up against the Lions. And I know the Lions only let up 20 points to the Rams. The Lions allowed Matthew Stafford to throw like 50 to 60 times in this game. So
over 300 yards. I think only one of 2 people to throw over 300 yards.
Yeah. So we don't want to. I'll make a quick plug real quick for Thursday. Rachaad White, who's a pass catching machine out of the backfield. That's a great matchup for him because even though the Lions are very good against running backs, they're very good at stopping the run. Those cheap catches are going to be right up Baker's alley with this team. So for me, if you have Jordan Love, can't play him this week, that's the guy I want to rock in my lineup.
Yeah, I would rank them Baker, Geno, and then Fields based on the fact that just offensive rankings. The Bucs have a better offense than both the Seahawks and the Steelers, and the schedule's pretty easy. I mean, the Lions, obviously, then the Broncos, then the Eagles, and the Falcons. Like, the Saints is really their first tough matchup, and by that point, you should have Jordan Love back. And if you have the roster depth and want to, pick up 2 quarterbacks to stream, Geno's going to end up getting the Dolphins, who don't have a great defense. They're going to play the Lions as well. The Giants are horrifically bad, so that's a good matchup for Geno. And if for some reason you want to pick up Fields, he also has the Broncos and the Raiders. So. But I think me and Nick are kind of in agreement with how we'd rank them. All right. Going now to the running backs. So to start off with Alexander Mattison, owned in 10% of leagues. Zach Charbonnet, owned in 60% of leagues. Jamal Williams, 7% of leagues. Justice Hill, 3% of leagues. Bucky Irving, 20% of leagues. I'm not loving the names here, Nick. If the injury to Kenneth Walker is a bit serious as an ab injury, he said he's good. I think he's going to play, but even if he misses a game or 2, Zach Charbonnet is probably a good pickup. And he's probably a good handcuff. That's why he is owned in 60% of leagues, probably not in most of your leagues, but the rest of these guys, I don't know which one of these are starting. And I don't, I'm a Bucky Irving, truther, so he is the only stash I see here. I don't see anybody else that I really would stash, but I also wouldn't drop. I wouldn't rush and drop somebody to pick up Bucky Irving. Depending on your lineup and your structure on your team.
Totally. I agree with that. I think if there's one stash, it's Bucky Irving. For the long run, I think Justice Hill has a ton of upside. I thought he looked really good, and I don't think that Derrick Henry looked great. I will say the Ravens game script more often than not is going to be Derrick Henry favorable versus Justice Hill favorable. But when you have over 50% of the snap share and you're in on third down and short passing games, like he has so much more upside in what has been a top 5 offense in football. And last year we watched Gus Edwards get 13 touchdowns. So those should go to Derrick Henry's way, but they're going to make up some yards and some catches there. So those are the two that I really like. I agree with Nick. If Kenneth Walker is out, Charbonnet is like a must start against I think they have Denver this week, right?
No, they just
no,
they
have Denver.
New England.
New England. Yeah. So I would 100% like that matchup. And then Madison looked pretty good. And we were told it was Zamir White and it was going to be his show. And Zamir White played pretty well, but Madison was getting in on first and second down a lot more than we thought he was going to. We thought he might be the third down back. Turns out, no, Madison was getting some of those early touches, which to me tells me they don't know which one's going to be the RB1 for the future and who's going to be the number one. Maybe it is running back by committee, but Madison presents some upside. I just don't think the Raiders offense is good enough for him to be. He's probably more of a touchdown or bust guy, and you don't want a bottom 10 offense for a touchdown or bust running back.
All right, going to receivers. Raheed Shaheed owned in 42% of leagues. He was late round draft prospect who played very well on week 1. Brandon Cook scored a touchdown, owned in 30% of leagues. Alec Pierce seemed like the wide receiver 1 over there with the Colts, owned in less than 1% of leagues. And then for the Rams, we have 2 options here. Tyler Johnson owned in 0% of leagues, and then Demarcus Robinson. I don't know his number, but he's not owned in many leagues either. Both should be able to be picked up. Just saw that Puka Nacua is officially now on the IR. So if you're missing Puka Nacua, you're probably attacking a receiver, and you could attack one of those Rams receivers. Sunday Night Football, there is a connection with both Demarcus Robinson and Tyler Johnson. I'm going to pull up the numbers right here before Nick gives his take. I know both of them had 7 targets. So Tyler Johnson ended up with 5 receptions for 79 yards on 7 targets. Demarcus Robinson ended up with 4 receptions for 42 yards on 7 targets. So Nick, I think receivers are actually the best target we have here on the waiver wire. Who do you like if you're targeting any of them?
So I said before the season, I think the Rams have the second best offense for fantasy football. I'm going to stick with that take. Even with Puka Nacua and his injury, Tyler Johnson was so clearly getting targets. And yes, it's a little inflated because Stafford got so many passing attempts. But at the end of the day, those are 2 guys between Puka and Kupp that were at the top of the wide receiver board. Like, both of these guys were electric last year, 2 years ago. And even in this first game, they were both tracking to have great fantasy performances. So one of these 2 guys is going to get slotted into that role. To me, I think Tyler Johnson is the more talented younger receiver, but to Nick's point, Demarcus Robinson has more of that chemistry. So it really could go either way. Those are the 2 that I would really want to target on the waivers this week. And you're probably looking at a flex play. The Rams are looking at going into Arizona. Arizona let up a ton of yards to the Bills, who do not have nearly the receiving core.
That should be a favorable matchup.
So you're looking at guys that can probably slot into your lineup right away. So I'm pretty confident that Tyler Johnson or Demarcus Robinson, one of them is going to have the very good week. If I had to take my pick, it would be Tyler Johnson.
All right. Next up, or not last up, but next up, we have tight ends here. Isaiah Likely owned in 10% of leagues. Tight end 1 on the week, the only tight end to score over 15 fantasy PPR points. Colby Parkinson owned in 2% of leagues, and Foster Moreau owned in 0.1% of leagues. And the percentages are based off of ESPN, by the way. So check your leagues. We like Sleeper, but it's Sleeper's a little bit different. So we went off of ESPN. All right, Nick, obviously Likely, and are you attacking the other 2 if needed? David Njoku looks like he's banged up. I forget if he went on IR. Jake Ferguson as well is going to go on the IR. So it does look like there needs to be tight ends added this week.
Yep. So you definitely have to pick up someone to start. And to me, Colby Parkinson's the one. I don't like him more than Likely after what I saw from Likely, but I think Colby Parkinson week to week is the safer replacement for either of those 2. Likely definitely presents the upside. I probably would not have said that before Thursday night's game, to be fair. But Colby Parkinson got a ton of work. He's running those flat routes just like a Dallas Goedert did. And if you saw Dallas Goedert on the waivers with knowing that it's an elite offense, he's got that much timeshare on the field. There's no Tyler Higbee right now competing with him for that role. You know that Puka's out. He could see some uptick in his workload from there. Like, it checks a few more boxes for me in terms of reliability. If you want to go win your league, it's likely. I mean, he definitely shattered a lot of expectations this week. He's the tight end one on the week. Every single one of those elite tight ends busted except for Kyle Pitts. Like, exactly when we say week 1 is odd, there you go. That's the high drafted tight end that performed to expectation. So likely to me presents more of the upside. If you told me at the end of the season he finished between the tight end 7 and 10, I would not be surprised based on what I saw. He really played more like a very good slot receiver in this offense than a tight end, a backup tight end. So likely has more of that upside, but for me, Colby Parkinson is more the reliable. I don't want to spend all that fab on likely if you don't need to.
I'm also intrigued by Luke Shoemaker on the Cowboys. He's a guy that they really liked last season. I think this is his second season, I want to say, and could slot in there on an offense that will throw the ball a lot. Yeah. Some defenses here. If you need to stream defenses, like me and Nick do like to stream defenses, the Seattle Seahawks are going to the New England Patriots. The Los Angeles Chargers are going to the Carolina Panthers. The Indianapolis Colts travel to Green Bay. Maybe Malik Willis will be their quarterback, maybe not. And the Pittsburgh Steelers, who are just led by TJ Watt, are traveling to the Denver Broncos. So some streaming options right there. I think any of them are fine. Yep. I don't know if Nick has a preferred choice, but I think any of them are fine.
I agree. I like all 4 of Nick's picks there. I would take any single one of them if I could, but to me, the worst offense there is Carolina and Denver. So the Chargers and Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh, clearly the best defense on this list, would be the number 1. Chargers 2, Indy 3, Seattle 4.
All right. So now we're going to go to our top 5 takeaways from the week. So normally, if you've listened to us for the past few years, we'll do a pretty big show. We'll kind of go game by game and give you our biggest takeaway. Kind of wanted to switch things up a little bit. So me and Nick are going to give you our top 5 fantasy football takeaways each week. So this could be about a player, a team, a position group. It could be just about anything, whatever your top 5 takeaways are. There's no rules to it. Just as long as it makes it fantasy relevant, that's really it. So, Nick, I don't know if you ordered yours out. I ordered mine out.
Yep.
What is your fifth takeaway, your lowest priority takeaway, I guess I should say?
Oh, I don't have it that way. I just have my 5.
Fine. That's fine.
So the first thing I'm going with, and I kind of went in game order. So I'm going for Thursday night first. I say that Rashee Rice, someone that I've been hammering home on, I think he's going to be the best Chiefs skill position player this year. I think he's going to eclipse Kelsey in terms of fantasy points. Rashee was clearly the number 1 target on the team. He clearly looks like he's taking the leap to receiver 1. He had 9 targets, 7 catches, 103 yards. He had the highest snap share of all the receivers on the team. 75 of his yards came from the slot, but he only lined up in the slot on 50% of his snaps. So that's a target percentage of 37.5% in the slot. Hollywood Brown is exclusively an outside receiver. Once he gets back from injury, you're going to see a lot more snaps from Rashee Rice in the slot, which is going to lead to a lot more fantasy points. On top of that, Worthy was phenomenal. I own him in leagues. I really like him. But for a rookie, 3 targets, 2 catches, 1 rushing attempt for 2 touchdowns. That's a little bit of an outlier. And Rashee Rice was more consistent. He's definitely, I know a lot of people do not like Rashee Rice for the offseason stuff. I'm sure he's going to get called Slant Boy within the next 3 weeks. But he was underdrafted, not just for fantasy, but for his team. He was the 5th flex player, flexible option off the board. Travis Kelce went before him. Obviously, Isaiah Pacheco. And then Hollywood and Xavier were both going before him up until 2 weeks before the season when Hollywood
real drafts happened, basically.
Yeah, exactly. So the ADP totally flipped there, and Rashee Rice, he's proving that he's going to be pretty much a league-winning receiver at this point.
I'm keeping it short and sweet, and don't overthink when streaming defenses. Bad teams are bad, and bad quarterbacks are bad. My favorite 3 this week were that the Giants faced the Vikings defense, who isn't good, and they were the number 1 defense on the week, I believe, with 22 fantasy points. The Panthers faced the Saints. The Saints scored 14 fantasy points, and the only reason that number wasn't higher, I think they pulled the starters. They either pulled the starters or they took their foot off the gas. They're up 30-0. They if those players got bonus checks for shutouts, like we get bonus points in fantasy, that game would have been a shutout. Bryce Young would not have scored a point. The Broncos against the Seahawks only scored 9 points due to safeties counting against them and the pick and just like some bad situations, but the Broncos did not move the ball. So I'm cool with – I didn't put the Patriots in here because the Cincy defense actually disappointed, but I'd play defenses against the Patriots. Sure. I think the Browns are going to be a really, really bad offense. I think Will Levis is horrendous. The Bears had a good chunk of fantasy points as well, and it's a shame because the offense around them is actually really good, but Will Levis is really bad. Point being, just trust the streaming options against those bad offenses. There were like 25, 26 really competitive teams this year. But the ones that aren't, there is a drop-off.
Yeah.
All right, number 4, what do you got?
I think that the Eagles offense, Nick and I have been screaming it from the heavens leading up to the season, and I think it came true. They are the best offense for fantasy.
This was one of my points that I took away. So we agree on this.
Saquon Barkley was the RB1 on the week. He had 80% snap share, which is extremely high for a running back. He had over 120 all-purpose yards, 3 touchdowns, and this was in the worst field conditions I think we've seen in football. Really everybody was slipping all over the field. On top of that, then you go A.J. Brown, wide receiver 6, dominant day. You have Devontae Smith, wide receiver 16. He had the most snaps from the entire receiving floor, even out snapping A.J. Brown. Similar targets. I think one had 8, one had 9. I forget which one had which. But he had the highest percentage of snaps from the slot. And last year, he did not do that. Kellen Moore being the offensive coordinator, he produced elite numbers for Keenan Allen and CeeDee Lamb in these roles. So for me, I think that Devontae Smith is somebody that I'm willing to trade high on at this point. And all of this production, RB1, wide receiver 6, wide receiver 16, came with Jalen Hurts in a bad game with 3 turnovers, including a red zone interception on bad turf. Everything kind of went bad, and this team scored over 30 points in football and had 3 great seasons, 3 games. A.J. Brown performed to ADP. Saquon outperformed it. Devontae Smith outperformed it. So everything looked like it fired on all cylinders. Nick and I, we're going to give ourselves a pat on the back week 1 because I think we both still echo this is the best team for fantasy football offensively.
I agree. I don't know who's selling Devontae Smith. I only got him in one of my 4 leagues. One of them's Dynasty, so really wanted a 3, and that bummed me out. I wanted more shares of him, and he's just one of those guys I just did not get enough shares of.
Yeah, I couldn't get him anywhere, and he's someone that I really wanted to. So when I say trade high, I mean don't be afraid to trade someone that you're not really in love with anymore based off what you saw, like a Drake London or Chris Olave, and try and pull that off because somebody will be willing to do that trade.
This is an offense that you can play your guys every week, and you could have confidence in.
Yeah.
Now, my take, the Texans offense, they will be very productive. There is a risk with that Texans offense because there are too many mouths to feed. CJ Stroud finished as your quarterback 8, which isn't bad, but you drafted him as your quarterback 5 or 6. He finished with 18.7 fantasy points, 324 yards, and 2 tutties. Joe Mixon, I was all over the Joe Mixon train this offseason. And guess how many shares I have him in? I have a goose egg of Joe Mixon shares. And I was all over the guy. Nick knows I was all over the Joe Mixon train this offseason. He finishes your running back 1, 26.8 fantasy points, 30 carries for 159 and a touchdown. Then he had 3 receptions for 19 yards. He was drafted as a running back 13, by the way. Mixon was great. Stephon Diggs, 21.9 fantasy points, 6 receptions for 33 yards. I think he also had 2 touchdowns on 6 targets. So the touchdowns kind of saved his day. Nico Collins at wide receiver 11, the true wide receiver 1 on this team in terms of targets and snap share. 6 receptions for 117 yards, 8 targets, led the team. And then there's Tank Dell, who I'm worried is going to be the odd man out. Wide receiver 45, 8.9 fantasy points, 3 receptions, 40 yards, but still had 7 targets. So what that tells me is he had more targets than Diggs. Didn't catch all the balls that Diggs did. I think he got missed on a couple of those, but Diggs had the red zone targets. One of these receivers is going to bust every single week. Unless it's a shootout game where the Texans score 50 points, one of them is going to bust every single week. And it's going to be really, really tough to play that Texan every single week. But you probably have to due to the draft capital that you spent on these guys. All these guys I just named were in rounds 4 to 5 you drafted. You're going to have to play them most weeks. that's going to be tough, and not all of them will produce. And there's nothing you can do about it because you drafted them.
Here's what I will say to echo your point. On top of being scared about it, there was a lot of, outside of those top 4 guys at the running back and wide receiver position, there was a lot of other guys that got time on that field. And any single time I watched a target or a rushing attempt go to any of them, I was like, ooh, like it's not one of the guys that you drafted high with your fantasy cap. And all those 4 guys Nick mentioned were all drafted in your top 5 or 6 rounds of fantasy. So definitely going to be a lot riskier than I think we even thought.
Yep. All right. Your third take.
I'm going to overreact a little bit because what's better to do on Monday? Monday for us, Tuesday for you guys, than to overreact. I'm readjusting who my top 3 running backs are for fantasy. I'm going Christian McCaffrey 1, Saquon Barkley 2, and I would put Devon Achane number 3 based off what I saw this week. And granted, I haven't seen my guy Breece Hall yet, but based off what I saw,
they may have to adjust the position rankings. Devon Achane looked like a receiver out there, not a running back.
Hey, you can flex him if you want. You could. The Dolphins played absolutely terrible for actual football, and all their guys had massive fantasy production.
It's hilarious. It's so hilarious.
It made no sense. But
they should have lost that game. They really deserved to lose that game. The ETN fumble was terrible. They should have lost that game.
Yeah, I don't think they deserve to win it. And Achane in that time played phenomenal in, again, little workload, which is only going to improve. I just got the notification, which helps reinforce this. Raheem Mostert going from healthy to questionable, as he does, all the time.
Every single year.
But the Dolphins only had 71 offensive plays. It's a good amount, but it's not a ton for this week. Achane had played just over 50% of snaps, the most by any running back on the team. But when he was out on the field, he had 46% usage. That was the highest across the entire NFL. He had 7 catches and 10 carries. Which is extraordinarily high when you consider how little he was on the field and how much he was used. On top of that, he ran 26 routes as a running back. So that's the 3rd amongst all running backs this week. The only 2 that outdid him was Kyren Williams, where we talked about the Rams had such an outlier in passing attempts, and Jerome Ford, where we saw the game. We know how far behind they were and just in a pass up offense the entire time. And I will say this. The Jaguars front 7 was so much better than I think a lot of people thought. Like, they could not move the ball on the ground. So when you get better matchups from this team, it's going to be better days for Devon Achane. And even with that, he was one of only a few running backs to eclipse 20 points this week. So I'm very confident in Devon Achane. I was very bullish on him in the preseason. I'm even more bullish on him based off the usage that I saw, because I was very concerned that Raheem Mostert would still own some of that role. But Achane also got a touchdown in a goal line package. Like, that was Raheem Mostert's role. If that's going to switch more towards Achane, he's a lock for a top 5 running back, and he has the upside of the RB1 every single week with how elite this offense is.
I was worried about Anthony Richardson coming into the season, and he delivered on his ADP through that first game, quarterback 4, 27.1. But what is the repercussions of Anthony Richardson? The repercussions of Anthony Richardson, and this is the take, he is bad for your Colts skill position players. Yeah. He is very bad. Jonathan Taylor, running back 28 with 10.8 fantasy points, saved his day with a touchdown, 16 carries, 48 yards, not one target, not one. That's a problem. I'm a Taylor owner. Taylor won me a lot of money a couple years ago. Nick knows. My most successful fantasy season ever. Taylor in all 4 leagues. I won close to $1,500 winning 2 championships and a points title. So I'm indebted to Taylor for life. And I don't think he's the problem. But no targets, that's a problem. And if you're not going to get targets, you're not a top 10 fantasy football back. That is the reality of it. Take the name out of it. Yep. Taylor is not going to be a top 10 fantasy football back if he does not get targets. Michael Pittman last year was very, very productive with Gardner Minshew. He ends up being wide receiver 54, 7.1 fantasy points, 4 receptions on 31 yards. He did have 8 targets and led the team. Ashton Dulin, wide receiver 25, 12.4 fantasy points, 1 reception for 54 yards. I think he's the guy that did the crossing route. The Texans kind of hit each other. Adonai Mitchell, 1 reception for 2 yards on 5 targets. Richardson missed him twice with deep bombs.
Yep.
And then there's Alec Pierce, 21.5 fantasy points, 3 receptions, 125 yards, and a reception and a touchdown on 3 targets. That is an outlier. I'm not going to believe in Alec Pierce. I am still a bit out on Anthony Richardson. The rushing numbers will be great, and that's going to help him a lot. I think he's inaccurate. I think he has a cannon, but it's not an accurate cannon. I think it's just, let's just F it, somebody's down there. I think there's a lot of red flags around that Colts team besides Anthony Richardson right now in terms of fantasy football. I'm sure as a defensive coach or defensive coordinator, it's going to be tough to game plan, but in fantasy football, I see red flags across the board.
I agree. I echo that. On top of that, Richardson only had 9 completions in the game. Like, that's ridiculously low.
So my take through the middle of the third quarter was Anthony Richardson is a bust of fantasy football, and I was right. And then he had like that stupid long touchdown to Dolan, and it was a dumb touchdown. It was like it's a crossing route. The Texans didn't cover it well. Like it shouldn't have happened. He made a couple other, but like the game plan can't just be let me throw it up deep 10 times and hope it works. Play a cover 4 at that point. Just play a cover 4. Number 2, what do you got?
Nick's gonna hate this one. Well, he might like it, but I'm gonna go pound the desk on a team I pounded the desk on, and
they were bad. They were very, very bad. They were bad across the wall. I can't say one good thing about them, and I think that head coach has got to get canned.
I wonder I think we're talking about the same team, but we'll see. Bengals?
It's the Bengals, yes. Zach Taylor was 1-6 in week 1s or 1-5 in week 1s, I believe. They are bad early in the season, and that is inexcusable. And I'll let you get to your take in a second. Bill Belichick should be coaching that team.
That's a good point. I like that one. But
that team wins a Super Bowl with Bill Belichick. I will pound the desk on that one. I'll let you make your point.
My take is the Bengals are one of the most dysfunctional organizations in football. And my fantasy takeaway from it is I don't think we really realized how terrible of an offseason that the Bengals had up until we saw the Jamar Chase issues over the last 2 weeks. So first, Brian Callahan walks, and say what you want about the Titans and how bad Levis looked. That is the most creative that offense has looked in 4 or 5 years since Mike Vrabel came there. There was a ton of wide receiver in motion. Tony Pollard had his best game in 2 years. So say what you want. They found a way to make the offense more creative. And if Will Levis wasn't throwing underhand passes to the defense.
Levis is so bad. I don't want to interrupt your take, but like a friend asked me to rank every quarterback after week 1. Levis is bottom 5. He's really bad. They totally upgraded that offense. Callahan is not the problem. Levis is not it. And I know the Bears defense is pretty 100%. Stout. I don't care. You're up 17-0. You have no business losing that game.
The offense looked creative. The defense looked really good. So to me, the Titans, I'm not saying they're a quarterback away, but it would not surprise me week 17, the Tennessee Titans are in a Jets type of situation, or a Tampa Bay is better, where you can get a veteran quarterback upgrade and the offense is so stout. The coach looks good. The defense looks good. And you have all the makings of a champion. And the division, it's tough, but it's not like the toughest division.
Up for grabs. I think it's up for grabs. They'll beat each other up, but it's up for grabs.
Anyway, then we go to Joe Mixon, who Nick talked about earlier. RB2 on the week as of right now. CMC, Brees haven't played. We'll see if that moves. But they were willing to cut Joe Mixon and then change their mind because someone offered them a 7th round pick. Like, that's horrendous. You just saw Joe Mixon have his most efficient game as a running back that he had even through all of last year. Joe Mixon last year was not a great efficient running back.
Nope.
But you repair him. You put him in a good offense, which is what we thought the Bengals had, and he was even more efficient with a defensive-minded coach. So that doesn't check a box. You then replace him with Zach Moss, who's on his 3rd team in 5 years, and I don't want to pound on him because he had a decent fantasy day for his ADP, but he was no star. He was clearly not Joe Mixon. Then, on top of that, after you let all this talent walk, including Tyler Boyd, you then watch you not pay your stars in Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, and you're missing crucial time, training camp, mini camp, contract issues, and then you get T. Higgins hurt, and you didn't even have the conscious mind to say we're not going to pay you, but we're going to use the money to allocate into backups and fixing the receiving room. It was terrible. It was absolutely horrendous. And you know what? I don't care. I had money on the Patriots money line because I saw the stats about
how much money did you have on Patriots money line?
I had a 100% bonus profit boost on it, and I bet $2.
I know what the number is. So that's why.
And I won 16. $2 for $16. We love it. I'm a micro bettor because I'm not a gambling addict, but I have some fun with the numbers. But I saw the number Nick was talking about. Burrow's 1-5 in the first 2 weeks when he's healthy. Now he's 1-6. So I was willing to take the odds on that. And listen, they might turn it around. They might fire on all cylinders.
Oh, they'll be fine because week 1 is weird. Like they'll be fine, but this is still like this is a problem with the head coach, a problem with the offensive coordinator, and a problem with Burrow. Nobody had a game plan. It just nobody had a game plan. Nobody had a game plan. Totally there was not any game plan. There was no juice in that team. I think Nick's right about the dysfunctionalness of it. And to be fair, like I know why they're not paying T. Higgins because he's always hurt and he wants a bag. And Chase has 2 years left on his deal. Like, I get it. But at the same time, yeah, they are one of the biggest losers coming out of this week for sure. The only benefit is that the Browns look terrible and the Ravens also lost. So,
yeah.
Anyway, exactly. My second take is to be patient with your rookies. I have a lot of rookie numbers here. Some good, some bad. Caleb Williams finishes quarterback 29, 7.2 fantasy points. He looked bad, 14-29, 93 passing yards, 5 rushing yards for 15 yards. Looked bad, but didn't lose them the game at least. Jaden Daniels. I was all over the Jaden. And me and Nick have been backing Jaden Daniels this offseason, but I was all over the train of Sunday morning. Play him over guys like Dak Prescott. Quarterback 3, 28.2 fantasy points, 17 for 24 passing, 100 I think it was 100-something passing yards. On the ground, he had 16 rushing yards for 88 yards with 2 rushing touchdowns. He has the most rushing yards for any rookie quarterback in a week 1 debut since 2000. Dak Prescott also had 11.5 fantasy points, so I hope those who asked those questions Sunday morning did listen to me. Going to the receivers, Xavier Worthy was wide receiver 10. Nick gave you his stat line, but he had 20.8 fantasy points. Ladd McConkey had wide receiver 17. He was 14.9 fantasy points, 539-1, 7 targets, led the team. Brian Thomas, wide receiver 18. He had 14.7 fantasy points. He had 4 for 47 and a touchdown, 4 targets, tied for the most targets on the team. Malik Neighbors, wide receiver 29, 11.6 fantasy points, 5 for 66 with 7 targets, somehow out-targeted by Wan'Dale Robinson with 12. Unbelievable. Keon Coleman, wide receiver 42, 9.1 fantasy points, 4 for 51 on 5 targets, who also led the team. Xavier Legette, wide receiver 51, 7.5 fantasy points, 4 for 35, 7 targets, led the team. Marvin Harrison, wide receiver 98, 1.4 fantasy points for 1 reception, 4 yards on 3 targets. Then Brock Bowers, tight end 3 on the week, 11.8 fantasy points, 6 for 58, 8 targets, led the team. Very, very, very promising stat line for Brock Bowers if you spent high capital on him. My point being, I think there's a lot of positivity to look for on this list. The Marvin Harrison one is glaring, and that's a problem. But remember, these are rookies, and you have to be patient. I am a little concerned that Harrison and Kyler just isn't the duo that would probably mesh well. Kyler does like to improvise, and that probably is going to take a couple weeks for Marvin Harrison to understand. But I think there's a lot of positivity here. If you played McConkey, Worthy, or Brian Thomas, you're probably stoked. If you played Neighbors and Coleman or Legette, you're probably like, that's fine. If you played Bowers, you're probably happy. If you played Daniels, you're stoked. If you played Caleb, you're worried. But I think there's a lot of positivity. And my overall point, again, be patient with your rookies. Do not drop any of these guys. Do not trade any of these guys, especially Marvin Harrison, because you will not be thrilled about that.
But if you do want to trade them or put them on the waiver wire, I'll take your call. Like I'm more than happy to buy any of these rookies you're low on.
I will too.
And my fab on anyone you drop because it will be better.
All right. Last takeaway, Nick. What do you got?
Cooper Kupp was the steal of the draft. I mean,
I got him nowhere. I was so upset. I wanted him. His ADP was so low. I think he had the worst ADP out of anybody in fantasy football. It was at 37, and me and Nick both knew how bad it was. And because of where I was drafting in my 3 leagues, I was drafting at 6, 7, and 9. I got him nowhere, and I was so upset I couldn't get him anywhere.
I have one league where I have Saquon Barkley, Cooper Kupp. I'm still waiting on Garrett and Debo to see.
You're playing with the circus over there.
No, that's a legit league, but I'm the crowning champion, and I'm happy to have those two. if dysfunctional Burrow didn't let me down, I might have had one of the best weeks in my fantasy career. But besides the point, let's get on the Cooper Kupp train and get into this. 32 fantasy points. He had multiple rushing attempts. He had 21 targets, 14 catches, 110 yards, touchdown. He had 87 unrealized air yards from the 7 incomplete targets. If you put that all together, that screams fantasy stud. And unfortunately, that's what a lot of us thought Puka would be. Granted, injured. But even before the injury, he had still had 8 targets halfway through the second quarter. So it wasn't even like you could say, oh, it's just because he got injured, he got 20 targets. He was on pace for more than 20 targets when Puka got injured. So say what you want. Cooper Kupp's a stud. He's been that stud. If he stays out on that field, he is the league winner for fantasy. Unquestioned, he will be the MVP. He will finish top 3 to 5. If Puka is back right after his stint on the IR, the 4 weeks, he's still going to finish in the top 10 if he's healthy. There is no doubt about it.
Puka doesn't worry me. And
he
Puka didn't worry before the season either.
Me too.
Kupp had like 3 injuries last year. Kupp wasn't bad last year. Puka wasn't good because Kupp was bad. Puka was good because Stafford throws a lot and Kupp was gone. And that's just the reality of it.
100%. And listen, if you missed out on Cooper Kupp, I'm sorry, because you're probably going to go into that matchup and be at such a disadvantage because of how good he was for fantasy. And granted, this is all on the fantasy community because almost every single analyst said you need to own Cooper Kupp somewhere. And his ADP should have risen in a lot of leagues.
Well, I wonder what his true ADP was if you look at serious drafting leagues. And there's no way to pull that. But in my serious leagues, he didn't get to his ADP because the ADP wasn't serious. He was gone by the end of round 2 or early round 3. He wasn't anywhere close to round 4. Not in any of my leagues. That's why I didn't get him.
I think I have him in 2 leagues. One, I have him in Dynasty, where he goes a lot lower in Dynasty naturally from the age.
Yeah, for sure.
But in my 10-man PPR league with keepers, where guys like Puka were kept, he still fell all the way to 30. And the fact is, there is no reason that as a fantasy community, and I take shame on myself, I have my rankings. I had him ranked above Drake London and Chris Olave. Even having that much confidence in him, there's no way you could take him that high, knowing that ADP on a ranking system has him 15 to 20 picks later. So shame on all the apps for that. But there is no reason that he deserved to be this low in the rankings. And good thing guys like Nick and I can be here to tell you got to take your guys. And
good thing I could tell you to take him, and I don't get him anywhere. That is my least favorite share that I did not get this season. And I didn't pass on him. Like, again, I was drafting in the back half of the draft. So I did my first round pick, then my second round pick, then my third round pick is late. I didn't pass on him. I didn't choose Mike Evans. I didn't choose Olave. I didn't choose Drake London. I didn't choose the only guy I passed on him was maybe like Pacheco or Gibbs. But of course, that's who I'm going to take in round 2. So just sucks. It's sucky. All right. My last point is that the mid-round running backs dominated. Mm-hmm. Running back 2 was Joe Mixon at 26.8 points. He was drafted at running back 13. I went off of one list on ESPN for this, so rankings are all over the place. Running back 5 on the week was Alvin Kamara with 22 points. He was 15 for 83 and 1 on the ground, 5 receptions, 27 yards. He was drafted at running back 11. I think at a lot of leagues, his ADP was actually lower than running back 11. Running back 6 on the week was Ramondre Stevenson with 21.6 fantasy points. I was all out on him. He had a great week, though. 25 for 120 and 1, 3 receptions for 6 yards. He was drafted as the running back 20. Running back 7 on the week was James Conner with 19.3 fantasy points. He went 16, 50, and 1, 3 receptions for 33 yards. He was drafted as your running back 13. Running back 8 on the week, Kenneth Walker. He had 18.9 fantasy points. He went 2103 and 1, 2 receptions for 6 yards. He was drafted as the running back 16. Running back 8 on the week is a tie, actually. Aaron Jones, 18.9 fantasy points as well. He had 14, 94, and 1 touchdown on the ground, 2 receptions for 15 yards, drafted as the running back 19. I only wanted to go in the top 10, but I'll give you 2 more names. Running back 11, Mr. Breakaway Speed, Tony Pollard, 18.4 fantasy points, 16, 82, and 1 on the ground, 3 receptions for 12 yards. He was drafted as the running back 30. And then running back 12, a guy that I had on my all-bust list this week, James Robinson, 18.9 fantasy points. And I do love him on the season. I wasn't just busting him for the season. I love him on the season. I have 2 shares of him. 12, 40, and 1 on the ground. 3 receptions for 49 yards, drafted as the running back 25.
Who was that?
James Robinson.
James Robinson? Okay.
No, Brian Robinson. Too
Okay,
many Robinsons.
Okay.
Brian Robinson, sorry about that. So Brian Robinson was the running back 12 on the week, 18.9 fantasy points, 12, 40, and 1 on the ground, 3 receptions for 19 yards as the running back 25, drafted as a running back 25. Here's a list of running backs that did not crack the top 10 this week. Bijan Robinson, Jahmyr Gibbs, Jonathan Taylor, Kyron Williams, Isaiah Pacheco, Travis Etienne, Josh Jacobs, and Derrick Henry. This list is strictly for the zero running back truthers. If you went zero running back and loaded up on 2 or 3 receivers and then drafted like 2 of these guys, you probably had a great week 1.
Yep.
I don't know why I fall into the running back trap every year. I do.
Here's what I will say. It's a little bit. This was definitely a draft weird year where wide receivers were so much more valuable than running back. Yes. Part of it is a lot of the running backs Nick said, your Alvin Kamara, Joe Mixon guys were drafted in 2017, and you expect the age cliff to hit. And it just looks like they all went on new team. Aaron Jones too, all went to new teams and were just as efficient. So, it happens. But when a guy like Joe Mixon in last year's draft, if you factored in team ADP, was a late 2nd round, early 3rd round pick. He was all the way in the 4th and 5th because receiver was so valuable.
Yep. All right. Well, those are our top 5 takeaways. We'll do this every single Tuesday. Try to keep the show, we're at 47. So that's good. Try to keep it around 40, 45. So hopefully you enjoyed us. Let us know what your biggest takeaways are after week 1. If you won, if you lost, keep engaging with us in the fantasy community. If you enjoyed the show, if you're a first-time listener or watcher, thank you so much for joining us. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure to drop a like on this video and any future video that you watch. Make sure you subscribe to that YouTube channel. Hit that bell icon so you get notifications every single time we go live. If you're listening in the car, maybe on an audio streaming podcast, we appreciate you as well. If you're on iTunes or Spotify, please give us a 5-star rating and a review, and make sure you're subscribed to the channel. If you need to reach out to us during the week for any fantasy football advice, Instagram is PrimeTime Fantasy Football Podcast, and Twitter is PrimeTime FF Pod. Thank you guys so much for your support as always, and we'll talk to you guys later this week.